The boardroom smelled like leather and desperation. Alexandra Holt stood at the head of the conference table, hands pressed flat against imported mahogany, willing them to stop shaking. 12 board members stared at her with the kind of patience that had already expired. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a Gulf Stream taxied across the Westchester County tarmac, oblivious to the $40 million disaster unfolding 3 stories above it. The oldest board member, Gregory Lansing, 72, 3 decades of aerospace deals etched into the lines around his mouth, broke the silence with surgical precision. How does the Seattle contract collapse in 48 hours? We had guarantees, signed letters of intent. Alexandra's throat constricted. The words she'd rehearsed at 4 a.m. dissolved like sugar in rain. It was my fault. I humiliated our most qualified engineer in front of 47 people. Rebecca Chen, the only woman on the board besides Alexandra, leaned forward. Which engineer? Richardson just closed the Miami deal. Chen, no relation, is on paternity leave. Alexandra's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Someone I didn't even know we had. Lansing's fingers drummed the table, each tap a small detonation. We don't have any black engineers on senior staff. We've never had any black engineers on senior staff. Alexandra's hand moved to the remote. The projection screen descended with a mechanical hum that filled the room like a held breath. Security footage filled the wall. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago. A man in a custodial uniform stood beside the Airbus H-145, eye hands moving across the engine, cowling with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He worked alone, no hesitation, no wasted motion, each tool selected with purpose, each connection tested with precision that made the MIT graduates look like undergraduates. Who is that? The question came from somewhere to Alexandra's left. She couldn't look away from the screen to identify the speaker. That's Marcus Thompson, and 48 hours ago, I destroyed him. The timestamp changed. 48 hours earlier, Thursday, 5:30 a.m. The apartment was the kind of small that required strategy. Marcus Thompson had learned to move through the railroad-style rooms without waking his daughter, a dance perfected over 4 years of single parenthood. The kitchen occupied maybe 80 square feet. Morning light hadn't reached this part of Queens yet, wouldn't for another hour. He measured pancake batter by feel, the same way he'd measured hydraulic fluid in Kandahar when the power went out and insurgents were 3 kilometers out. Muscle memory didn't forget, even when you tried to make it. The bills were stacked on the table where he'd left them last night. Con Edison, $127, red overdue stamp bleeding through the envelope. T-Mobile, $68. The rent envelope held $850 in cash, counted 3 times because you didn't give the landlord ammunition. Emma's robotics parts receipt sat underneath. $43.67 at Micro Center, paid for with the tip money he'd saved from helping Carlos move his brother's furniture last month. Footsteps in the hallway. Emma appeared in the doorway, 7 years old, hair braided the way her mother used to do it before Marcus taught himself YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m. She had Sarah's eyes, dark and serious, the kind that saw more than people expected. Dad, why do you wake up when it's still dark outside? Marcus flipped the pancake, watched it land perfectly centered in the pan. So I can be home when you wake up, baby girl, and make you breakfast before school. Emma climbed onto the chair, knees tucked under her chin. She studied the bills without touching them, already understanding at 7 what some people never learned. Mom used to make pancakes with chocolate chips. Do you remember? The spatula paused mid-flip. Marcus set it down, turned to face her fully. I remember everything about your mama. She put the chips in a smiley face and made them spell your name once for your 3rd birthday. The photo frame sat on the counter between the coffee maker and the ancient toaster Marcus had fixed 4 times. Sarah Marie Thompson, 1986 to 2020. The picture showed her in nurse scrubs, mid-laugh at something off camera. Marcus had taken it 3 months before the diagnosis, back when cancer was something that happened to other people's wives. Do you think she'd be proud of my robot? Marcus knelt, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. The linoleum was cold through his jeans. She'd be so proud, she'd show everyone at the hospital. Just like I'm proud. You're building something that thinks for itself, baby. That's not easy. Even for grown-ups. Emma's smile did something to his chest. The same thing it did every morning. Reminded him why he'd left the army, why he mopped floors at night, why he measured his life in hours with her instead of career milestones. The truck smelled like motor oil and the Pine air freshener that had stopped working in 2019. Marcus kept it hanging from the rearview mirror anyway, the same way he kept his Class A uniform in the back of the closet. Some things you held on to not because they worked, but because letting go felt like amputation. The odometer read 187,412 miles. He'd bought the Ford F-150 used in 2017 for $4,000, paid cash, spent another $1,000 over the years keeping it running. The toolkit in the truck bed was worth more than the vehicle. Military-grade precision instruments he'd collected over 6 years of service. Torque wrenches calibrated to tolerances measured in Newton meters. Digital multimeters that could detect voltage drops a standard model would miss. A fiber optic inspection camera he'd won in a poker game in Kandahar from a Navy mechanic who thought Marcus was bluffing. He'd told himself 100 times to sell them. The tools represented maybe $6,000 if he found the right buyer. $6,000 was 3 months' rent. Emma's robotics camp next summer. The security deposit on a place with heat that worked consistently. But every time he started listing them on eBay, his hands stopped at the keyboard. Letting go of the tools meant accepting he'd never use them again. Accepting that the person he'd been, the engineer who'd kept multi-million-dollar aircraft operational in sandstorms and under mortar fire, was gone permanently, were replaced by someone whose expertise was measured in how thoroughly he could mop a hangar floor. Emma pressed her face against the passenger window as they pulled up to PS 114. The building was brick, 70 years old, the kind of school that had seen better decades. The workshop windows on the second floor were dark, had been dark for 3 weeks now. Dad, the workshop lights are still off. Marcus saw them, saw the darkness where there should have been the fluorescent glow of students arriving early to work on projects. Saw Emma's reflection in the window, the slight downturn of her mouth, the way her shoulders curved inward. I see that, baby. Principal Martinez said they need $8,000. The competition is in 4 weeks. How am I supposed to finish my robot in the dark? His hands tightened on the steering wheel, one knuckles pressing white against brown skin. $8,000. The number sat in his stomach like battery acid. $8,000 was what Holt Aerotech spent on catered lunch for a single board meeting. He'd seen the invoices when he emptied the executive floor trash cans. You won't be in the dark, I promise. The words came out firm, certain, the voice he'd used in the army when soldiers asked if the helicopter would hold together long enough to get them home. The voice that couldn't afford doubt. Principal Martinez approached the truck window before Emma could respond. She was Latina, mid-40s, wearing the expression of someone who'd fought bureaucracy so long she'd forgotten what victory looked like. "Mr. Thompson," I called the district again. "They say electrical work is scheduled for next fiscal year." Marcus's jaw worked, teeth grinding against each other. "That's 7 months away. The regional robotics competition is—" "I know. I'm sorry. Budget cuts. We're doing everything we can." Emma's voice came from the passenger seat, small and accommodating in a way that broke something in Marcus every time he heard it. "It's okay, Dad. I can use the lamp at home." He watched her walk toward the school entrance, backpack too heavy for her frame, shoulders carrying weight she shouldn't have to understand yet. Other kids streamed past her, white kids mostly, some Asian, a few Latino. The kind of demographic distribution that didn't happen by accident in a city as diverse as New York. The parking lot emptied slowly. Marcus sat in the truck, engine still running, heat blowing against the November cold. His phone sat in the cup holder. His screen cracked from when he dropped it in a hangar and a forklift had rolled over it. The crack ran diagonal, splitting his reflection when he looked at it. He pulled up the voice memo app, pressed record. People see what they expect to see. They see a black man in a janitor uniform. They see a janitor. They don't ask questions. His voice sounded different in recordings, flatter, more careful. The voice of someone who'd learned to make himself smaller. Sarah used to say, "I could fix anything. Helicopters, refrigerators, broken hearts." After she died, I just needed to fix one thing, being there for Emma. The memory arrived uninvited. Sarah in the hospital bed, 3 days before the end, lucid enough to squeeze his hand but not strong enough to hold on for long. "Promise me you'll put her first. Not the job, not the career. Her." I promise. "I mean it, Marcus. The Army will replace you in a week. She can't replace you ever." The recording app showed 47 seconds elapsed. Marcus pressed stop, deleted it immediately. Talking to himself didn't change anything. Didn't fix the lights at PS 114. Didn't undo the choice he'd made 4 years ago to leave the only career that made sense. I left the Army 3 months after we buried her. Honorable discharge, Warrant Officer 2, Aviation Maintenance Division. 6 years keeping Blackhawks and Apaches flying in Iraq and Afghanistan. The discharge papers were in the glove compartment, folded and refolded so many times the creases had started to tear. He didn't need to look at them to remember what they said. Exemplary service, recipient of Army Commendation Medal. 3 patents pending in rotary wing stabilization systems. Recommended for promotion to Chief Warrant Officer 3. All of it useless in civilian life when you were black and couldn't afford the time to network, to schmooze, to prove yourself in interviews while someone else watched your daughter. In Mosul, I rebuilt a turbine engine during a sandstorm with a headlamp and a prayer. In Kandahar, I restarted a downed Chinook using a car battery because the auxiliary power unit took shrapnel. He could still feel it, the weight of the wrench in his hand, the vibration when the engine finally caught, the pilot's shout of relief over the radio. Could still taste the sand in his mouth, feel the heat that turned metal too hot to touch with bare hands. The Army gave me medals, commendations, called me essential. Essential until you weren't. Until your wife died and your daughter needed you, and essential became a word other people used to describe other people's fathers. But medals don't pick up a 7-year-old from school. Commendations don't make pancakes at 5:30 a.m. Marcus put the truck in gear, pulled out of the parking lot. Traffic on Queens Boulevard moved like sludge, brake lights stretching ahead in an unbroken chain of red. The radio played something forgettable. He turned it off. So I found work that let me be a father first. Night shift custodian at Holt Aerotech, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The job posting had been on Craigslist, misspelled and vague. Seeking janitorial staff, experience preferred but not required, must pass background check. He'd applied at 9 p.m., interviewed at midnight with a facilities manager who never made eye contact, started the next night. Pay was $16.50 an hour. 40 hours a week came to $660 before taxes. After taxes, after the city took its piece, and the state took its piece, and Social Security took its piece, he cleared about $2,300 a month. Rent was $850. Utilities averaged $200. Food, if he was careful, if he bought generic and cooked everything, was $300. Emma's school supplies, clothes she grew out of every 6 months, the emergency fund he tried to maintain, it all disappeared. The hours meant I could drop her off, pick her up, help with homework, read bedtime stories. The hours meant he slept from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., curtains drawn against daylight, phone on silent. Meant he drank coffee at 10 p.m. the way other people drank it at 6 a.m. It meant his circadian rhythm was permanently inverted, his body never quite sure whether to be awake or asleep. Nobody at Holt knew I'd sat in Pentagon briefings. Nobody knew I held 3 patents in rotary wing stabilization systems. Nobody knew the janitor mopping their floors had once been the guy they'd call when $1 million aircraft wouldn't start. The truck turned onto the highway, merging into traffic that would take him back to Sunnyside, back to the apartment where he'd sleep 4 hours before Emma came home. The skyline appeared in the rearview mirror, Manhattan crystalline and indifferent, towers full of people who'd never mopped a floor in their lives. Holt Aerotech sprawled across 23 acres in Westchester, a compound of hangars and laboratories and testing facilities that looked like a small airport. Marcus pulled into the employee lot at 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes early for his 11 o'clock shift. The night was cold enough to see breath, clear enough to count stars if you weren't in New York. The custodial entrance was around back, past the executive parking spaces with their reserved signs and their German sedans. Marcus's employee badge was 7 years old, laminated photo showing a younger version of himself. Shorter hair, 30 pounds heavier from army muscle that had melted away eating ramen and stress. The badge reader beeped green. The door unlocked with a heavy click. The main hangar was 3 stories tall, big enough to hold 4 helicopters simultaneously. Tonight, only one occupied the space, an Airbus H145, white and silver, the Holt Aerotech logo painted along the tail boom in letters 2 feet high. Floodlights mounted on ceiling tracks bathed it in artificial daylight. The aircraft sat silent, rotors still, a $40 million sculpture of aviation engineering. Marcus pushed his cleaning cart past it slowly, eyes tracking details his hands itched to touch. The landing gear sat slightly off level, left skid maybe half an inch lower than right. Could be normal ground settling, could be hydraulic pressure imbalance. The main rotor blades showed faint stress marks near the attachment points, microscopic fractures that would need inspection before they became macroscopic failures. The engine cowling was closed, but one panel sat flush wrong. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. The kind of thing that could mean loose fasteners or warped housing. 7 years. 2,555 nights. Nobody asks the janitor what he sees. The maintenance computer station sat unmanned near the hangar's east wall, 3 monitors displaying real-time diagnostics on every system in the H-145. Marcus had learned early in his tenure to clean near it slowly, to let his eyes wander across the screens while his hands worked the mop. The engineers never noticed. To them he was furniture, animate, but irrelevant. Tonight, the screens showed nominal readings across the board. Hydraulic pressure steady, fuel systems balanced, electrical outputs within tolerance. He was about to move on when one number flickered. Turbine intake pressure regulation, a 0.3 psi variance that appeared and disappeared and appeared again. 0.3 wasn't critical. Wasn't even reportable under FAA guidelines. But Marcus had seen this before. I in a Chinook outside Mosul that flew through a sandstorm and ingested enough particulate matter to coat the inside of the pressure regulation chamber with metallic dust so fine it bypassed every filter. The diagnostics had shown normal because the dust wasn't causing electrical faults, wasn't tripping any sensors. It was just accumulating, slowly, building up until the day the helicopter tried to climb to altitude, and the pressure differential became critical, and the engine flamed out. The Chinook had dropped 400 feet before the pilot managed to restart. They'd been lucky. Lucky it happened over friendly territory. Lucky the crew chief knew to pump the throttle. Lucky Marcus had diagnosed it on the ground first, and the captain had ignored him. This H-145 wouldn't be lucky, wouldn't have altitude to recover. It would be carrying passengers, executives probably, or clients, would fail at the worst possible moment because that's when mechanical failures happened, when you needed them not to. He set down the mop, moved closer to the screen, pulled the small notebook from his pocket, the one he used to track maintenance issues he saw but couldn't report because reporting meant revealing he understood things janitors weren't supposed to understand. Pressure differential, turbine intake, 0.3 psi variance, intermittent, probable cause, metallic dust accumulation in regulation chamber, needs manual cleaning before load testing. Behind him, across the hangar, heels clicked on concrete. The sound was distinctive, hard sole on hard surface, the precise rhythm of someone walking with purpose. Marcus's hand was still on the notebook when he recognized what it meant. He shoved the notebook in his pocket, grabbed the mop, stepped back from the screen. Too late. Alexandra Holt emerged from the control room corridor with 8 engineers trailing behind her like ducklings. Marcus recognized most of them, Dr. Richardson from MIT, Chen from Caltech, the Oxford guy whose name he'd never learned. All white except Chen, all male except one, all wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to prove you belonged. Alexandra's eyes landed on Marcus like targeting lasers. "What are you doing near that equipment?" Her voice cut through the hangar's ambient hum. Ventilation systems, electrical substations, the low-frequency vibration of a facility that never truly slept. Marcus set down the mop, stepped back, eye hands visible. "Just cleaning, ma'am. Making sure no dust on the..." You were looking at the diagnostic data. Not a question. An accusation wrapped in professional courtesy. The engineers exchanged glances behind her, the kind of looks that carried entire conversations. "No, ma'am, I was..." "Do you even understand what you're looking at? Do you have any idea what a pressure regulation system does?" Marcus kept his face neutral, his voice even. The voice he'd learned in the Army when officers who'd never touched an aircraft tried to tell him how to fix them. "No, ma'am." The MIT engineer, Richardson, late 50s wedding ring that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, leaned toward his colleague and whispered something that ended in muffled laughter. Probably thinks helicopters run on mop water. More laughter, quieter this time. The kind meant to be overheard without being attributable. Alexandra didn't acknowledge it, but she didn't stop it either. This is a $40 million aircraft. You're here to clean floors, not touch operational equipment. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. She turned to the security guard who'd appeared in the doorway. White guy, 50s, ex-cop based on the way he carried himself. Escort him to custodial areas only. If I see him near engineering equipment again, terminate him immediately. Yes, ma'am. Come on, let's go. The walk to the custodial office took 90 seconds, long enough for the guard to make sure Marcus understood. You people need to learn your place. This isn't affirmative action charity. This is aerospace engineering. Stay in your lane. Marcus said nothing, jaw clenched, hands steady at his sides. His heart rate hadn't changed. 124 beats per minute, the same rate it hit in Kandahar when mortars fell close enough to feel the concussion in your chest. The same rate that meant danger close, but not immediate death. Other night shift workers watched from doorways and corners. 3 black, 2 Latino, all with the same expression Marcus saw in the bathroom mirror every morning before work. The look of people who'd learned to be invisible because visibility carried cost. Rosa Delgado watched from the supply room doorway. 50 years old, Latina, 20 years at Holt. Eyes that recognized what she was seeing because she'd lived it herself in a dozen different forms. The break room fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made Marcus's teeth ache. 2 a.m. The shift was 1/3 done. His sandwich tasted like cardboard, but he ate it anyway because wasting food was wasting money. Rosa entered without asking, sat down across the table. She didn't say anything for 30 seconds, just watched him eat. How long have you been here? Marcus swallowed, took a drink of water from the bottle he refilled at the fountain. 7 years. Rosa pulled a spiral notebook from her bag, set it on the table between them. The cover was worn smooth, the spiral bent from use. She opened it to the first page. Then, you're in here. The handwriting was small, precise, dated entries filling every line. Names Marcus recognized, people who'd worked night shift and disappeared, people who'd been reassigned, people who'd filed complaints about things that never got fixed. Tyrone Jackson, fired March 15th, 19. Official reason, attitude problem. Real reason, reported safety violation in fuel storage protocols. Keisha Williams, not hired July 22nd, 20. Official reason, not culture fit. Real reason, she had a master's degree in mechanical engineering and asked about the lack of diversity in senior positions during her interview. Miguel Santos, terminated November 3rd, 2021. Official reason, attendance issues. Real reason, requested religious accommodation for Friday prayers. Jamal Washington, fired August 14th, 19. Official reason, communication problems. Real reason, reported his manager for calling him articulate, like it was surprising. Marcus flipped through the pages slowly. 73 entries spanning 7 years. Every single person of color who'd tried to speak up, who'd reported problems, who'd questioned why the engineering staff looked like a yacht club. Why didn't anyone report this to authorities? Rosa's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who'd tried and learned. We did. Every time. HR buries it. Felix Okonkwo makes it disappear like it never happened. Who is Felix Okonkwo? HR director. Been here 15 years. Before him, it was someone else doing the same thing. Before that, someone else. The system doesn't need to change because the system works exactly how it's designed to work. Marcus closed the notebook, slid it back across the table. Why are you showing me this? Because you're different. 7 years mopping floors and you never complained, never caused problems, never gave them a reason. But I've watched you. I've seen how you look at those helicopters. You understand them. Understanding doesn't change anything. No, but evidence does. The apartment was dark when Marcus got home at 7:15 a.m. He dropped Emma at school 2 hours earlier, circled back to catch the end of his shift. Sleep pulled at him like gravity, but his mind wouldn't stop cataloging what he'd seen. The pressure variance, the notebook with 73 names, Rose's face when she said evidence. He made coffee because sleeping now meant waking at noon, and noon meant missing the library's quiet hours when Emma did homework, and he could think. The kitchen table still held the bills from this morning, unchanged and demanding. He pushed them aside, opened his laptop, a 2015 MacBook Air with a battery that lasted 90 minutes, and a crack across the screen from when Emma had knocked it off the counter 3 years ago. Google search, Holt Aerotech discrimination lawsuit. The results loaded slowly on the apartment's bargain internet. New York Times, 2018, Holt Aerotech settles discrimination suit for undisclosed sum. The article was behind a paywall, but the preview showed enough. 3 former employees, all black, claiming systematic exclusion from promotions and hostile work environment. Settlement included mandatory NDAs, no admission of wrongdoing. Another search, Holt Aerotech employee reviews diversity. Glassdoor lit up like a distress flare. Great company if you're white and male. HR protects management, not employees. Diversity is PR only, don't believe the website. The reviews were anonymous, scattered across 5 years, but the pattern was consistent enough to be structural. He clicked to LinkedIn, searched Holt Aerotech employees, filtered by current engineers. The results loaded, 127 profiles. He started counting. White faces, white names, white universities, 116 by his count. Asian faces, Asian names, 8. Latino, 3. Black, 0. 0. 7 years he'd worked there and never put together that he was the only black person in the building who wasn't pushing a mop or driving a forklift. The search history led him backward, following links to older articles. 1997. A New York Post piece about an engineer named Marcus Thompson Sr., who died in a car accident on Route 87 near Albany. The article was 3 paragraphs, buried in the Metro section. Marcus scrolled down, looking for follow-up coverage. There wasn't any. He searched the NTSB database, found the accident report. Single vehicle collision, driver lost control, car left roadway at high speed, fatality on scene. Brake fluid reservoir found empty. Brake lines showed evidence of cutting tool marks, but investigation closed due to lack of witness testimony, and family declined to pursue wrongful death claim. Family declined. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled to his mother's contact. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Baby, you okay? It's 7 in the morning. Did Uncle Marcus die in an accident?" Silence on the line, the kind that confirmed before words could deny. "Why are you asking about that?" "Because I'm working at the same company, and I think they killed him." "Marcus, don't... Did he file EEOC complaints before he died?" Her breath caught, audible over the connection. He filed 3. Said they were pushing him out because he wouldn't stay quiet about safety issues. Said they were falsifying inspection reports to meet federal contract deadlines. What happened to the complaints? The EEOC investigator said there wasn't enough evidence. Your uncle's supervisor said he was disgruntled, difficult to work with. A month later, his brakes failed. You think they cut them? I know they did. The NTSB report said so, but the investigator closed it anyway because pursuing it would have meant fighting Holt's lawyers, and we didn't have money for that kind of fight. Marcus closed his eyes, pressed the phone against his ear hard enough to hurt. I'm building a case against them. I need to know if you'll testify about the complaints, about the NTSB report. Marcus, you have Emma to think about. I am thinking about her. I'm thinking about the fact that her workshop doesn't have lights because districts don't fund schools in neighborhoods like ours. I'm thinking about the fact that she's going to grow up in a world that looks at her the same way it looked at me, at Uncle Marcus, at every black person who tried to be excellent at something besides basketball. His mother's voice cracked. You sound like him, like your uncle. He said the same things before he died. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was dead. Marcus didn't have an answer for that. He heard Emma's voice in his head. Are you going to fight the bad people? Heard Sarah's voice from the hospital bed. Promise me you'll put her first. I have to go, Mom. Emma's got school. He ended the call before she could argue, sat staring at the laptop screen. The NTSB report was still open. Uncle Marcus's name at the top. Marcus Thompson Sr., 52, Senior Aviation Engineer. Survived by wife Patricia, son Marcus Jr., daughter Angela, 3 grandchildren. Survived by family who'd been too scared or too broke or too tired to fight back. The phone rang again immediately. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him press accept. The voice was male, digitally distorted, the kind of thing you heard in movies about whistleblowers and consequences. Stop asking questions about 1997. You have a daughter to think about, Mr. Thompson. The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He sat perfectly still, phone in hand, heart rate climbing past 140. The apartment was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the traffic noise filtering through windows that didn't quite seal. Emma's backpack hung on the hook by the door, pink and purple, and covered in robot stickers she'd collected from cereal boxes. You have a daughter to think about. He did. He absolutely did. Which was why he picked up the laptop, opened a new browser tab, and typed, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division contact. The walk to pick up Emma from school happened in sections Marcus couldn't quite remember afterward. His body went through the motions, truck, traffic, parking lot, waiting outside the chain link fence with the other parents. His mind stayed in the apartment, replaying the phone call, calculating how someone had gotten his number, wondering if they were watching him now. Emma emerged from the building with shoulders curved inward. She saw him, waved, but the gesture lacked her usual energy. Marcus's chest tightened. Hey, baby girl, how was school? She climbed into the truck, buckled herself in with the efficiency of a kid who'd been doing it since she was 5. Fine, just fine. The workshop is still dark. Mrs. Patterson said we have to work on projects at home until the district approves funding. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, hands gripping the wheel. Your robot. Can you finish it at home? I can try. But the soldering iron at home isn't as good as the school one, and I can't test the sensors properly without the full course setup. What if I helped you build a test course in the apartment? Emma looked at him with Sarah's eyes, seeing through the offer to the reality underneath. Dad, we don't have room for a test course, and you work all night. When would you sleep? I'll figure it out." She went quiet, staring out the window at the blur of Queens traffic. Marcus wanted to tell her about the investigation he was building, about Rosa's notebook and the DOJ and the promise he'd made to himself that she wouldn't grow up in the same world that had crushed her great-uncle. But she was 7. 7-year-olds needed to believe their parents could fix things, not that their parents were picking fights that might get them killed. The library parking lot was mostly empty at 4 p.m. on a Friday. Marcus and Emma claimed their usual table in the back corner, near the windows where afternoon light lasted longest. Emma spread out her homework, multiplication tables, a reading comprehension worksheet about ruby-throated hummingbirds, a permission slip for a field trip to the Natural History Museum. Marcus opened his laptop. She pulled up the research he'd started that morning. Emma worked on math, pencil scratching against paper. He typed searches, read articles, took notes in a document he'd started calling evidence. 20 minutes in, Emma set down her pencil. "Dad, what are you working on?" "Just something for my job, baby. You look worried." "I'm fine. You have the same face you had when Mom was sick." The comparison hit like a fist. Marcus closed the laptop, turned to face her fully. "I'm not sick, Emma. I promise. I'm just trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time." "At your work?" "At a lot of places. But yeah, starting with my work." She studied him with an intensity that was pure Sarah. The nurse's assessment, cataloging symptoms and calculating prognosis. "Is it dangerous?" Marcus thought about the phone call, about Uncle Marcus's cut brake lines, about 73 people who tried to speak up and been silenced. "No, baby. It's just hard." The lie tasted like copper. They worked in silence after that, Emma on homework, Marcus on building the case he hoped would matter. Around them, the library filled with the after-school crowd, high schoolers claiming computers, parents reading to toddlers in the children's section, elderly men reading newspapers in languages Marcus didn't recognize. By 5:30, Emma had finished her work. Marcus had compiled a list of 14 former Holt employees willing to break their ND as if federal protection was guaranteed. He'd found contact information for a DOJ attorney named Keisha Morrison who specialized in civil rights violations in corporate settings. He'd drafted an email he wasn't sure he had the courage to send. The walk back to the truck took them past PS 114. The workshop windows were still dark. Emma stopped, stared up at them. 4 weeks until competition. Maybe I can just do my best with what I have. Marcus knelt on the sidewalk, bringing himself to her eye level. Cars passed on the street behind them. Somewhere a siren wailed, growing closer, then fading. You're going to have those lights, Emma, I promise you. One way or another, you're going to finish that robot with everything you need. How do you know? Because some things aren't negotiable. Your future is one of them. She hugged him then, arms around his neck, face pressed against his shoulder. Marcus held her and stared at those dark windows and made a promise he had no idea how to keep. At home, Emma ate the spaghetti Marcus made from 99-cent pasta and $2 sauce. She did her reading, 20 minutes on hummingbirds, their migration patterns, their ability to fly backward. She brushed her teeth, put on pajamas, climbed into bed with the stuffed elephant Sarah had given her the day she was born. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot he'd occupied every night for 7 years. Story tonight. Actually, Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, baby. Are you going to be okay? The question was so direct it took Marcus a moment to formulate an answer. Why do you ask that? Because Mom wasn't okay, and you told me she was until she couldn't pretend anymore. Marcus's throat closed. He reached out, brushed hair back from Emma's forehead. I'm okay, Emma. I promise. Sometimes adults have to do hard things to make the world better. That's all this is. Is it because of what happened to me at the store? It's because of what's happened to a lot of people for a long time. The store, the workshop lights, all of it. It's all connected. Emma nodded slowly, processing. Mom used to say you were the bravest person she knew. She said you fix things nobody else could fix. I'm trying to live up to that. You already do, Dad. Every day. She rolled over, pulled the elephant close. Marcus kissed her forehead, turned off the light, stood in the doorway, watching her breathe until he was sure she was asleep. In the kitchen, he opened the laptop again. The email to Keisha Morrison was still in drafts, cursor blinking in the subject line. He typed, Pattern discrimination at Holt Aerotech. Request for investigation. His finger hovered over send. The phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. Last warning. Think about Emma. Marcus stared at it for 10 seconds. Then he pressed send on the email, blocked the number, and called Rosa. She answered immediately. I'm in. Whatever it takes. I'm building this case. You sure? They're going to come after you. They already are. Which means we're close to something they want protected. I'll bring the notebook tomorrow. You should meet Jamal Washington, the engineer they fired in 2019. He's been tracking former employees. Set it up. I need to know everyone who's willing to testify. Marcus, this could cost you everything. I know. But doing nothing costs more. He hung up, sat in the dark kitchen, and thought about Emma's question. Are you going to be okay? The honest answer was he didn't know. The necessary answer was yes, always yes. Because she needed to believe her father was invincible even when he felt like tissue paper. Across the city, in a penthouse that cost more per month than Marcus made in a year, Alexandra Holt sat at her desk staring at security footage. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago. The janitor stood at the maintenance computer, eyes scanning screens with unmistakable comprehension. His body language was all wrong, shoulders back, head up, hands moving with purpose. She rewound, watched again. There was something in the way he held himself, something that didn't match the uniform or the job title or the assumptions she'd made. Her finger hovered over the phone. She could call security, file a report, have him barred from the engineering areas permanently. That's what Felix would recommend. That's what the board would expect. Instead, she pressed pause, zoomed in on the janitor's face, and whispered to her empty office a question she couldn't answer. Who are you? Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made Marcus's breath visible inside the truck. The heater worked intermittently, blowing lukewarm air that smelled faintly of antifreeze. Emma sat in the passenger seat wearing her winter coat, the one from last year that was getting too small, sleeves stopping an inch above her wrists. The hardware store in Jackson Heights opened at 8. Marcus needed LED light strips, electrical tape, and wire cutters, enough supplies to rig something functional in Emma's bedroom so she could work on her robot without destroying her eyesight. $37.99, according to the website. He had $43 in cash, saved from skipping lunch 3 days this week. The parking lot was half full. Inside, fluorescent lights turned everything the color of old paper. Marcus grabbed a shopping basket, headed toward the electrical aisle. Emma walked beside him, quiet in the way she got when she was thinking too hard about things 7-year-olds shouldn't have to consider. They passed cleaning supplies, paint, plumbing fixtures. Marcus was reading the back of an LED package when he noticed the man following them. White guy, early 40s, store manager based on the polo shirt with embroidered logo. He stayed 15 feet back, walkie-talkie in hand, eyes locked on Marcus with the kind of attention usually reserved for active shoplifters. Emma noticed, too. Her hand found Marcus's, squeezed once. "Dad, why is that man watching us?" "Just shopping, baby. Ignore him." But the manager didn't stop. Followed them to the wire cutters, to the electrical tape, maintaining distance but making sure they knew he was there. Marcus felt Emma tense beside him, her fingers gripping tighter. They walked to checkout. The LED package felt heavier than it should, like carrying evidence of a crime they hadn't committed. Emma held the wire cutters, keeping both hands visible the way Marcus had taught her, without ever saying why. The manager intercepted them 3 feet from the register. "Receipt, please. Need to verify you paid for those." Marcus kept his voice level, his face neutral. "We're about to pay for them. Right now. Store policy. High theft area." The manager's eyes dropped to Emma, lingered there for a beat too long. "I'm sure you understand." Marcus set the items on the counter, pulled out exactly $43.67 in cash, counted it slowly, deliberately, making each bill snap as he laid it down. The cashier, a teenager who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, rang them up in silence. $42.17. Your change. Marcus pocketed the $1.50 without counting it, picked up the bag. Emma's hand found his again as they walked out. She didn't say anything until they reached the truck, until the doors were closed and locked and the manager was just a shape receding in the rearview mirror. Then she cried. Not loud, not dramatic. It was just tears sliding down her cheeks while she stared at her lap. Marcus pulled into an empty corner of the parking lot, killed the engine, turned in his seat to face her fully. "Emma, look at me." She did, eyes red and confused and hurt in a way that made Marcus want to drive back inside and do something he'd regret. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, baby. Listen to me carefully. Some people, they look at us and see something different than what we are. They see our skin before they see our hearts. Is that why Principal Martinez can't get the workshop lights fixed? Because I look like you?" The question landed like a blade between ribs. Marcus unbuckled, pulled Emma across the center console into a hug that bent them both at awkward angles. The lights aren't fixed because people make choices about who matters and who doesn't. But I'm going to change that. How? By making sure what happened to you today never happens again. To anyone. Emma pulled back, studied his face with Sarah's intensity. "You promise?" "I promise." The lie and the truth existed in the same breath. He couldn't promise to fix everything, to remake a world that had been broken for centuries, but he could promise to try, to fight, to refuse to accept that his daughter's brilliance mattered less because of melanin. They drove home in silence. Marcus installed the LED strips in Emma's room, running them along the ceiling and down one wall to create a workspace that wouldn't give her headaches. Emma watched, asked questions about voltage and circuits that told Marcus she'd been paying more attention in her robotics class than he'd realized. By noon, the setup was functional. Not professional, not perfect, but bright enough to work by. Emma positioned her robot parts on the desk, servos and sensors and the microcontroller she'd programmed herself to navigate obstacles using proximity detection. "This'll work, Dad. Thank you." Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathed in the coconut smell of her shampoo. 4 weeks until competition. You're going to build something amazing. What if I don't win? Then you'll have built something amazing anyway. That's what matters. But he knew in the way parents know things they can't articulate, that winning mattered to her more than she'd admit. That first place meant validation, meant proving she belonged in spaces that didn't make room for girls who looked like her. That the scholarship to Cornell's summer STEM program wasn't just about robots. It was about futures and possibilities and doors that opened or stayed locked based on things she couldn't control. Monday morning, Felix Okonkwo arrived at his office at 7:45, 15 minutes before anyone else in the HR department. He liked the quiet, the sense of control that came from being first. His desk was organized to the point of compulsion, inbox empty, pens aligned, coffee mug positioned exactly 2 inches from the keyboard's edge. The complaint form sat in the center, placed there by someone on the weekend custodial staff, Rosa Delgado, employee ID 4721. Allegation, racial discrimination and hostile work environment. Witnesses, Marcus Thompson, Carlos Rivera. Felix read it twice, expression never changing. Then he picked up the phone, dialed Alexandra's cell. She answered on the 4th ring, a voice carrying the distraction of someone managing 3 problems simultaneously. "This better be important, Felix. Miss Holt, we have another situation. Custodial staff alleging discrimination." He could hear traffic in the background, the muffled sound of a car service. "Handle it. I don't have time for HR drama before the Seattle demonstration. Of course, I'll have it resolved by end of day." Felix hung up, opened the deep drawer on his desk's right side. Inside, a file folder 3 inches thick, labeled Complaints, resolved in his own handwriting. 73 forms, spanning 7 years, each stamped with red ink that had faded from crimson to rust. No merit. Case closed. He stamped Rosa's complaint, filed it alphabetically between Roberts and Sanchez. 74 now. The system worked because people like Felix made it work. Because someone had to maintain standards and expectations and the natural order of things. His phone buzzed. Text from building security. Notification. Marcus Thompson accessed engineering sector 2347 Friday. Custodial clearance only. Felix typed a response. Flag for immediate termination upon next violation. Monitor all movements. Across Manhattan, in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, Alexandra stood at her kitchen counter with black coffee going cold in her hand. The laptop was open to employee files, Marcus Thompson's personnel record filling the screen. Employee ID 4732. Custodial services. Hire date, November 2018. 7 years. No disciplinary actions, no complaints. No absences except 3 days in 2021. She clicked the detail. Bereavement leave. Wife's funeral. She scrolled down. Education, Bachelor of Science, Mechanical Engineering, University of Virginia. Minor in Aerospace Systems. GPA 3.9. Her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Military service, United States Army, Aviation Maintenance Division, 2009 to 2017. Rank at discharge, Warrant Officer 2. Specialty, Rotary Wing Aircraft Systems, Maintenance and Repair. Honorable discharge. Reason for separation, family emergency. The words blurred. Alexandra set down the coffee, zoomed in on his application photo from 2018. He looked different, younger, heavier, wearing a suit that had probably cost a week's pay. The expression on his face wasn't the blank compliance she'd seen Friday night. It was hope, expectation, the look of someone who believed qualifications mattered. She clicked to commendations. Army Commendation Medal, 2015. Meritorious Service Medal, or 2016. Joint Service Achievement Medal, 2017. Her cursor hovered over a PDF labeled patents_pending. 3 files. She opened the first. Stabilization system for rotary wing aircraft in high wind conditions. Filed 2016. Co-inventors W02 Marcus Thompson, Dr. Sarah Chen, Major Robert Williams. Status: approved 2019. The second, predictive maintenance algorithm for turbine engines using vibration analysis. Filed 2017. Sole inventor W02 Marcus Thompson. Status: approved 2020. The third made her stop breathing. Advanced Pressure Regulation System for High-Altitude Helicopter Operations. Filed 2017. Sole inventor W02 Marcus Thompson. Status: approved 2021. Pressure regulation. The exact system he'd been looking at Friday night when she humiliated him in front of 47 people. Alexandra's hand covered her mouth. Her father had built this company on excellence, on hiring the best regardless of background, or so he'd claimed at every board meeting and investor call. But the personnel files told a different story. 127 engineers, 0 black. The math was too consistent to be coincidence. She picked up her phone, pulled up the security footage from Friday, watched Marcus at the maintenance computer, his eyes tracking data with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was seeing, watched herself approach, watched her own mouth form words she'd pay anything to take back. This is a $40 million aircraft. You're here to clean floors, not touch operational equipment. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, accusing. She'd become her father without realizing it, on perpetuating systems she'd inherited without questioning. The Ice Queen the press called her wasn't armor anymore. It was who she actually was. Her phone buzzed. Felix, Thompson flagged for termination, awaiting your approval. Alexandra's thumb hovered over the reply field. She should approve it. Marcus had violated protocols, accessed areas beyond his clearance, created liability exposure. That's what the lawyers would say, what the board would expect. Instead, she typed, "Hold. Need to review personnel matter personally." Tuesday evening, Rosa's basement smelled like old books and determination. The walls were covered now, copies of complaint forms, highlighted sections of employment contracts, photographs of all 73 people who tried to fight back and lost. Marcus stood in the center, surrounded by evidence of a pattern so clear it became invisible through repetition. Rosa spread out the contents of the box she'd rescued from storage. Documents dating back to 1994, when Felix's predecessor had started building the system Felix later perfected. This isn't just Felix. This is institutional. She held up a memo, yellowed with age. The letterhead read, "From the desk of Harold Morrison, Director of Human Resources." The text was brief, efficient, maintain demographic consistency for client comfort, avoid diversity hires in customer-facing roles, focus recruitment on traditional pipelines. Traditional pipelines meant Ivy League, meant private schools, meant networks that excluded everyone who didn't start with advantages compounded over generations. Marcus photographed it with his phone. He added it to the folder he'd labeled Evidence. Rebecca Chen sat at Rosa's kitchen table, laptop open, pulling internal emails from Holt's server using credentials she probably shouldn't still have. Found the promotion files. All 47 decisions from 2018 to 2024. She turned the screen toward Marcus. Excel spreadsheet, rows color-coded. Green for approved, red for rejected. Every black candidate, red. Every white candidate with identical or lesser qualifications, green. Can you get me the salary data? Rebecca's fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation. Already have it. $22,000 average disparity. Black engineers versus white engineers. Same experience level, same education. Carlos Rivera arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing, carrying a small digital recorder. Got 3 conversations. Maintenance supervisors, both of them. One talked about how those people aren't suited for technical work. The other said black engineers make clients uncomfortable because it looks like affirmative action instead of merit. He set the recorder on the table, pressed play. The voices were clear, casual, the racism so normalized they forgot to whisper. Marcus listened, jaw tight, hands steady. This was what they said when they thought nobody was documenting, when they believed the system would protect them. The basement door opened. Jamal Washington entered, carrying a messenger bag that looked expensive despite being 5 years old. He was 42, black, sharp-eyed, wearing the controlled anger of someone who'd been fighting this battle longer than Marcus had known it existed. Jamal set the bag on the table, pulled out a folder. 14 former employees willing to break their ND as if we get federal protection. I've got signed statements, documentation of their terminations, proof that HR buried every complaint. Marcus shook his hand, felt the grip of an ally who understood stakes. Felix fired you in 2019? Said I had communication problems. My real problem was reporting my manager for calling me articulate like he discovered a talking dog. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. I remember that. You filed a formal complaint. Felix told the manager to be more careful about optics. Jamal's laugh was sharp. 3 months later, I was gone. Severance offer contingent on an NDA that made me complicit in my own erasure. I refused. Took 18 months to find work because Felix blacklisted me across the industry. How'd you survive? Savings. Wife's income. Pride that cost us our house. The room went quiet. Marcus thought about Emma, about the apartment they could barely afford, about what 18 months without income would do to their lives. Why come back now? Because I'm tired of being afraid. And because you're building something that might actually matter. Rosa pulled out the final document, the one she'd been holding back until everyone was present. An email from 2016 sender, Jonathan Holt, CEO. Recipient, Felix Okonkwo, HR Director. Subject line, Diversity Initiatives. Felix, Board wants diversity PR program for federal contract compliance. Give them what they want publicly. Maintain operational homogeneity privately. Client comfort equals revenue. Handle this carefully. Marcus read it 3 times. Alexandra's father, and the man who'd built Holt Aerotech's reputation on excellence, had explicitly ordered the system that destroyed 73 careers. Her father knew. She might not have known, but he built this deliberately. Jamal leaned against the wall. That's not just discrimination. That's conspiracy. And if they submitted false diversity certifications for federal contracts, that's fraud. Federal contract fraud. Rebecca pulled up another file. They did. I've got the submissions from 2016 through 2024. Every single one claims 15% minority workforce. Reality is 7%, all in custodial and facilities. Marcus did the math in his head. Federal contracts totaling $370 million over 8 years, all obtained using fraudulent diversity data. The Department of Justice didn't just prosecute that kind of fraud. They made examples of it. What about my uncle? The 1997 case? Rosa pulled out a thin folder, handed it over. Inside, NTSB accident report. Photocopies of newspaper articles, a handwritten letter from Patricia Thompson to the EEOC investigator asking why the case was closed. The brake lines were cut. The NTSB documented it. But without witness testimony and with your family unable to afford lawyers, the case died. Statute of limitations on murder doesn't exist. True. But proving Holt was involved 30 years later is nearly impossible without physical evidence or confession. Marcus set down the folder, looked at each person in the room. We need federal authority. This is beyond state jurisdiction. He pulled out his phone. He showed them the email response he'd received that morning. Sender, Special Agent Keisha Morrison, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Mr. Thompson, your inquiry aligns with an ongoing investigation. Please call to discuss cooperation and protection protocols. Rosa's eyes widened. The DOJ is already investigating? Have been for 2 years, according to Agent Morrison. They've been building a case but needed inside evidence. We just gave them everything they were missing. The implications settled over the room like weight. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. Wasn't just about 73 complaints or Emma's workshop lights. This was federal, institutional, the kind of case that changed laws instead of just punishing individuals. Carlos spoke first, voice quiet. They'll destroy you for this, professionally. Financially, maybe worse. Marcus thought about the phone call, the distorted voice telling him to think about Emma. Thought about Uncle Marcus's cut brake lines and Patricia Thompson's unanswered letters. They're already trying, which means we're close to something they're desperate to protect. Rebecca closed her laptop, looked at him directly. I'm in. Whatever it takes. Jamal nodded. Same. Rosa touched the notebook that had started this. 73 names that deserved better. We do this right, with federal protection, with evidence they can't bury. We do this for everyone who couldn't fight back. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialed the number Agent Morrison had provided. She answered on the second ring, voice carrying the crisp efficiency of someone who lived in conference calls and depositions. Mr. Thompson. I've been waiting for you to call. I have evidence. 30 years of systematic discrimination, federal contract fraud, possible wrongful death. And I have witnesses willing to testify with protection. How soon can you meet? Tomorrow. 10 a.m. But it has to be somewhere off Holt property. They're watching me. Federal building in Manhattan. Bring everything you have. And Mr. Thompson, be careful. People who threaten witnesses rarely stop at phone calls. The call ended. Marcus looked at the assembled evidence, the people who'd risked everything to be here, the weight of responsibility that felt like drowning and flying simultaneously. Tomorrow, everything changes. Thursday morning, the H-145 wouldn't start. The ignition cycled. Fuel lines showed clean. Diagnostics reported normal across every system. But the turbine refused to turn over. Oh, it just clicked and died. Clicked and died. The mechanical sound of $40 million failing at the worst possible moment. 8 engineers surrounded it like a trauma team around a coding patient. Dr. Richardson from MIT checking electrical connections. Chen from Caltech running fuel pressure tests. The Oxford engineer whose name Marcus had never learned reviewing the diagnostic computer with increasing frustration. Alexandra stood 20 feet back, arms crossed, jaw so tight Marcus could see the muscle jumping from across the hangar. The Seattle client was scheduled to arrive at 3 p.m. for a demonstration flight. If the helicopter didn't fly, the deal died. And if the deal died, the board would have questions she couldn't answer. Marcus mopped the far end of the hangar, watching. As his eyes tracked the engineer's movements, inefficient, missing obvious signs. They'd replaced the starter motor twice, checked every relay, swapped out the ignition module, all standard protocols for electrical failure. But this wasn't electrical. Marcus had known that for 3 weeks, since the night he'd seen the pressure variance and documented it in his notebook. Metallic dust accumulation in the regulation chamber, building up slowly, bypassing diagnostics because sensors couldn't detect physical obstruction. The engineers would figure it out eventually. Maybe. Or they'd keep replacing components until they ran out of time and blamed the aircraft instead of their assumptions. He set down the mop, started walking toward the H-145, felt the weight of every eye in the hangar tracking him, or felt the risk of what he was about to do settle into his bones like cold. Alexandra turned, saw him approaching. Her expression shifted, surprise, then recognition, then something more complicated. You? Marcus stopped 10 feet away, hands visible, non-threatening. Yes, ma'am. You've been watching for 10 minutes. See something my engineers don't? Richardson scoffed from somewhere behind the helicopter. Miss Holt, with all due respect, I asked him a question, Dr. Richardson. The hangar went silent except for the ventilation system and the fluorescent lights humming their 60-cycle song. Marcus met Alexandra's eyes, saw something different there than Friday night. Curiosity instead of contempt. Desperation instead of certainty. It's not electrical, it's mechanical. A metallic dust accumulation in the pressure regulation chamber. Your diagnostics won't show it because it's physical obstruction, not sensor failure. The Stanford engineer, younger, maybe 35, expensive watch, stepped forward. Metallic dust? We ran a full system purge this morning. Standard protocol. Not deep enough. You need to remove the valve housing, manually clean interior surfaces with aviation-grade solvent, check the compressor intake for particulate residue. If you don't, it'll cycle fine on ground power, but fail under flight load within 3 days. The Oxford engineer's voice carried expensive education and practiced condescension. And you know this, because you have a degree or in aeronautical engineering we don't know about. Marcus kept his voice level, his face neutral. I know this because I've seen it before. Mosul, on 2015, Chinook that flew through a sandstorm, exact same failure mode. The silence changed quality. Several engineers exchanged glances. Alexandra's eyes narrowed, calculating. Can you fix it? Yes, ma'am. How long? 2 hours if I work alone. Longer if I have to explain while I work. Richardson moved into Marcus's peripheral vision. This is insane. He's a janitor. The liability exposure. Alexandra's voice cut through the objection like a blade through silk. Everyone out. Give him space. The engineers started to protest. Alexandra silenced them with a look Marcus had seen generals use, the kind that ended discussions by making them irrelevant. You have until 2 p.m., Mr. Thompson. Fix it. You keep your job. Fail. You're terminated immediately. No severance, no references, no second chances. Marcus held her gaze. Understood. He walked to the custodial office, feeling 47 pairs of eyes tracking his movement. The duffel bag sat in his locker where it had lived for 7 years, hidden behind cleaning supplies and the spare uniform he'd never needed. He pulled it out, carried it back to the hangar, set it on the floor beside the H-145. The zipper sounded loud in the silence. Inside, his tools, the ones he'd told himself he should sell, the ones that represented a version of himself he'd buried with Sarah, military-grade precision instruments, torque wrenches calibrated to specifications measured in Newton meters, a digital multimeter that could detect millivolt variations, the fiber optic inspection camera from Kandahar. The engineers who'd stayed to watch, Rebecca among them, went silent. These weren't consumer tools from Home Depot. These were professional-grade, military issue, the kind that cost thousands and required training to use properly. Marcus selected the first tool, a ratchet wrench with a custom grip he'd wrapped himself in Baghdad. It fit his hand like it had never left. "I need silence," he began. Removing the engine cowling took 8 minutes. 6 bolts, each requiring specific torque sequence to avoid warping the aluminum housing. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory overriding 7 years of enforced dormancy. The cowling came off clean, revealed the turbine assembly underneath. The pressure valve housing was buried deep, protected by layers of systems designed to keep civilian mechanics from accessing components they might damage. Marcus disconnected the electrical harness first, 12 connections, all color-coded in the military system he knew by heart. He tagged each with tape from his toolkit, ensuring reassembly would be perfect. The hydraulic lines came next, 3 of them, feeding into the valve assembly, each one carrying fluid under pressure that could blind you if it sprayed wrong. He bled them slowly, carefully, catching the excess in a pan he'd grabbed from maintenance supply. By noon, he had the valve housing out. It weighed maybe 12 pounds, compact and dense, engineered to tolerances most people couldn't visualize. He carried it to a workbench, set it down, opened it. The interior was coated with metallic dust so fine it looked like powder, like something you'd find in a pencil sharpener magnified 1,000 times. He photographed it with his phone, evidence for later, for the DOJ, on for the case he was building in parallel to fixing this helicopter. Aviation-grade solvent and microfiber cloths removed it slowly. He worked with the fiber optic camera, checking every surface, ensuring no residue remained. The dust came away in layers, revealing clean metal underneath that reflected the workbench light. The compressor intake required reaching into a space barely wider than his arm, working blind, guided by feel and experience. He used the vacuum probe attachment, extracting particulate matter in careful passes. The canister filled with the same metallic dust, proof that his diagnosis was correct, that 7 years of mopping floors hadn't erased what he knew. By 1:30, he was reassembling. Every connection had to be perfect. Every bolt torqued to exact specification. One mistake, and the engine wouldn't just fail to start, it would fail catastrophically, possibly in flight, possibly killing whoever was aboard. He reconnected the hydraulic lines, tested each one for pressure, connected the electrical harness, verified continuity on every circuit, closed the valve housing, installed it back in the turbine assembly, torqued the mounting bolts to 45 Newton meters exactly. At 1:47, he was reconnecting the final electrical connection. His hands were covered in grease despite the gloves. His back hurt from bending over the aircraft. His knees ached from crouching on concrete. But the work was done. He ran a manual pressure test using a gauge from his toolkit. The needle climbed smoothly. No fluctuations, no drops, no indication of the blockage that had been killing the system cell by cell. Did he close the engine cowling, torqued the bolts in sequence, stepped back? The engineers had returned, drawn by curiosity or professional obligation. 20 of them now, maybe more, gathered at a distance that was supposed to look casual, but was clearly intentional. Rebecca stood at the front, expression unreadable. Alexandra appeared at precisely 1:50 p.m. She didn't say anything, just walked to the pilot's door, climbed into the seat, reached for the ignition. The hangar held its breath. She turned the key. The starter motor whined. The turbine began to spin, slowly at first, building momentum. The rotor blades shuddered, caught air, began their rotation. The engine roared to life, smooth, powerful, the sound of $40 million remembering how to fly. Alexandra lifted the helicopter 6 inches off the ground, and it hovered there, steady, perfect, no vibration or hesitation. Then she set it down gently, shut off the engine. The rotors slowed, stopped. Silence fell again, heavier this time, weighted with implications nobody wanted to voice. She climbed out of the cockpit, walked over to Marcus, stopped 3 feet away. Everyone was watching. Phones were out, recording, waiting to see if the Ice Queen of Aviation would actually acknowledge the janitor who'd saved her $40 million deal. Marcus pulled off his gloves, looked her in the eye. That was remarkable. Where did you learn? Felix Okonkwo appeared from the office corridor. Marcus recognized the timing, calculated, strategic, designed to reclaim control of a narrative that was slipping. Miss Holt. A word. Now. Alexandra hesitated, looked between Felix and Marcus, then nodded. We'll continue this later, Mr. Thompson. She followed Felix toward her office. Marcus started cleaning up his tools, aware that half the hangar was still watching, still processing what they'd witnessed. Rebecca approached, voice low. That was brave and stupid in equal measure, probably more stupid. Felix is going to use this. Liability exposure, safety protocols, unauthorized maintenance. I know. Her expression softened into something that looked like respect. For what it's worth, I believed you. About the pressure system. I pulled the maintenance logs after Friday. You were right then, too. Marcus looked at her, saw an ally he hadn't expected. Will you testify, if it comes to that? Rebecca didn't hesitate. Yes. Alexandra's office overlooked the test facility. Glass walls that were supposed to project transparency, but mostly just made her feel exposed. Felix stood with his back to the window, hands clasped behind him, wearing the expression of someone delivering bad news they'd personally engineered. You just created massive liability exposure. Alexandra felt the exhaustion of 3 sleepless nights catching up, felt her patience fraying like worn rope. He saved the Seattle deal. Without him, we'd be calling the client right now to cancel. He's an uncertified custodian who tampered with a $40 million aircraft. If the FAA finds out, if OSHA investigates, this company faces federal scrutiny we cannot afford. But the helicopter is irrelevant. He violated every safety protocol we have. You want me to protect this company or not? The question landed like a trap because there was only one acceptable answer, and they both knew it. Alexandra walked to her desk, sat down, suddenly aware of how much her father's presence still occupied this room. His photograph on the wall, his awards in the display case, his legacy wrapped around her like gravity. What do you recommend? Terminate him. Immediately. I'll handle the paperwork, have him sign an NDA, minimize our exposure. She thought about Marcus's personnel file, about the patents, the military service, the bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, about 7 years of him mopping floors while engineers with half his expertise made 6 figures. Do it. The words came out before she could examine them, before she could acknowledge what they meant about who she'd become. Felix nodded once and left. Alexandra sat alone in her father's office, staring at his photograph, wondering when protecting the company had become indistinguishable from perpetuating everything wrong with it. Felix's office smelled like leather and old paper. Marcus sat across the desk, watching the HR director arrange documents with practiced precision. An NDA, a termination letter, a severance check that probably represented 2 weeks of his salary. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Equipment tampering, safety violations. Sign this, you get 2 weeks severance. Refuse, you get nothing. And I'll personally ensure you never work in aerospace again. Anywhere. Marcus read the NDA slowly. The language was dense, legal, designed to be intimidating. But the core message was clear. Employee acknowledges termination was for cause and waives all discrimination claims against Holt Aerotech and affiliated entities. Signing this meant complicity, meant accepting their version of events, meant Emma's workshop would stay dark and 73 other families would never get justice, and Uncle Marcus's cut brake lines would remain an unfortunate accident that nobody investigated. He set down the pen. No. Felix's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Excuse me? I'm not signing. Then you leave with nothing. No severance, no insurance continuation, no references, and good luck explaining to your daughter why you're unemployed. The threat was surgical, aimed at the one thing Felix knew would hurt most. Marcus stood, looked down at the man who'd buried 73 complaints, who'd built a career on making people disappear. I'll take my chances. Felix smiled, the expression of someone holding cards they hadn't played yet. Security will escort you out. Don't come back. And Mr. Thompson, I know about your little investigation. The DOJ contact, the former employees you've been talking to. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything. Already has. Which means I've got nothing left to lose. Marcus walked out before Felix could respond, felt security guards flanking him immediately. They followed him to his locker, watched him collect his personal items, the photo of Sarah and Emma, the spare shoes, the lunchbox Emma had decorated with robot stickers. 20 minutes later, he was in his truck, unemployed, blacklisted, and somehow more certain than ever that he was doing exactly what needed to be done. His phone rang. Rosa, Felix fired you. News travels fast. Carlos heard it from maintenance. Rebecca's calling an emergency meeting. Tonight, my basement, 8 p.m. I'll be there. Marcus, they're going to come after you harder now. You know that, right? I'm counting on it. Desperate people make mistakes. He hung up, sat in the parking lot, watching engineers stream out of buildings for lunch breaks they probably expensed. His bank account had $412. Rent was due in 9 days. Emma's school supply list for next semester was sitting on the kitchen counter, items highlighted that they couldn't afford. But for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't pretending to be smaller than he was. It wasn't hiding his expertise or accepting invisible as safe. The cost would be enormous. The consequences already were. But dignity, he was learning, wasn't something you could negotiate away in exchange for security. It was the thing you protected even when protection seemed impossible. That night, Rosa's basement was crowded. Marcus, Rebecca, Carlos, Jamal, and new faces. 3 more former Holt employees willing to risk NDA violations for the chance at justice. The walls had multiplied with evidence, strings connecting incidents across decades. Rosa spread out the final pieces. A filing cabinet from 1994 through 2024. 30 years of institutional racism documented in memo headers and email signatures. Felix's evolution from junior HR manager to director. The system's refinement from crude exclusion to sophisticated suppression. In the 2016 email from Jonathan Holt sat at the center, its words damning in their clarity. Maintain operational homogeneity privately. Client comfort equals revenue. Jamal pointed to another document, false diversity certifications for federal contracts. They claimed 15% minority workforce. Reality was 7%, all non-engineering roles. Marcus did the math he'd done before, let the numbers settle, $370 million in federal contracts, all obtained through fraud. Rebecca pulled up her laptop, showed salary data and promotion records side by side. $22,000 disparity, 47 promotion decisions, 0 black candidates approved. The pattern is irrefutable. Carlos played the recordings, supervisors casually discussing how those people weren't suited for technical work, how black engineers made clients uncomfortable. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal contract fraud, civil rights conspiracy, systematic discrimination documented across 3 decades. Everything the DOJ needed to not just prosecute individuals, but dismantle the system that enabled them. Marcus pulled out his phone, the email from Agent Morrison still open. Federal building, tomorrow, 10 a.m. We bring everything. Someone spoke from the doorway. The voice was familiar but unexpected. You'll need this too. Rebecca Chen stood there, but not the cautious Rebecca who'd kept her head down for 8 years. This Rebecca carried a briefcase and the expression of someone who'd made an irrevocable choice. Internal server access. Every email Felix ever sent. Every complaint he buried. Every conversation about maintaining culture fit that was really about excluding anyone who didn't look right. She set the briefcase on the table, opened it. Inside, printed emails, thousands of pages, organized chronologically. I copied everything before they could lock me out. If they fire me for this, I want it to mean something. Rosa looked at the assembled evidence. 30 years of documents, 73 complaints, 14 witnesses, 3 decades of systematic oppression made visible through the patient work of people who refused to stay silent. This is bigger than Holt. This is about changing the industry. Marcus thought about Emma, about the workshop lights, about Uncle Marcus's brake lines and 73 destroyed careers. Thought about the phone call threatening him to stop. About Felix's smile when he said, "You'll lose everything." About Alexandra's face when she ordered his termination. Tomorrow morning, we hand this to the DOJ, and then we let justice do what justice does. The group dispersed slowly, each person carrying copies of evidence, redundancy against retaliation. Marcus was the last to leave, standing in Rosa's basement surrounded by 30 years of proof that what he'd experienced wasn't isolated or imaginary, or the result of being too sensitive. It was systematic, intentional, built. And tomorrow, they were going to burn it down. At home, Emma was asleep, stuffed elephant clutched tight. Marcus stood in her doorway, watching her breathe, thinking about the conversation they'd need to have tomorrow when he explained why he didn't have a job anymore, and why the future just got harder, even though he was fighting to make it better. His phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. Last warning. Think about Emma. Marcus stared at it for 10 seconds. Then he forwarded it to Agent Morrison with a note. Evidence of witness intimidation. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. We're ready. He deleted the message, blocked the number, and walked to Emma's bedside. Kissed her forehead gently enough not to wake her. Whispered words she couldn't hear, but he needed to say. I'm making the world safer for you, baby girl. Even if it costs me everything. Especially then. In the kitchen, he made coffee he wouldn't drink, opened his laptop to an email he'd drafted 3 times and never sent. The subject line was simple: to Emma, if something happens. He didn't write it out of fear, but he wrote it because men who threatened witnesses rarely stopped at phone calls, because Uncle Marcus's brake lines were cut for asking the same questions Marcus was asking now, because protection and preparation weren't the same thing. The letter took an hour. When he finished, it said everything that mattered: that he loved her, that her mother would be proud, that fighting for what's right sometimes meant risking everything, that she should finish her robot and apply to MIT and never let anyone make her smaller than she was. He saved it, set it to send if he didn't log in for 72 consecutive hours. Then he went to bed, sleeping fitfully, dreaming of helicopters that wouldn't start and workshops without lights and his daughter's face when she asked if he was going to be okay. Outer tomorrow would answer questions he'd been asking for 7 years. Tomorrow the truth would be federal record instead of rumor. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, he was just a father who'd lost his job trying to give his daughter a world that didn't make her choose between dignity and survival. The thought that kept him awake wasn't fear. It was hope. Dangerous, necessary hope that maybe this time the evidence would be enough. The witnesses would matter. The system would bend toward justice instead of away from it. Maybe this time they'd listen. Marcus closed his eyes, felt Sarah's presence the way he sometimes did in moments that mattered, heard her voice from the hospital bed making him promise to put Emma first. "I am, Sarah. I promise. I'm putting her first by making sure she doesn't inherit the same world that broke you and killed your uncle and tried to make me invisible. I'm putting her first by refusing to teach her that survival means acceptance." Sleep came eventually, restless and thin, punctuated by dreams of tomorrow's reckoning. Friday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of November day where exhaust plumes hung in the air like punctuation. Marcus stood outside the Federal Building in Lower Manhattan at 9:42 a.m., 18 minutes early, wearing the same suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral 4 years ago. It still fit, but felt different now. Tighter across the shoulders, looser in the waist, the fabric holding memories of the last time he'd needed to look like someone who mattered. Emma had asked him why he was dressed up. He'd told her he had an important meeting, which was true, and that everything would be okay, which might not be. She'd hugged him extra tight at drop-off, intuition telling her something her 7-year-old vocabulary couldn't articulate. The Federal Building was gray stone and glass, imposing in the way government architecture intended. Security screening took 12 minutes. Metal detector, bag search, ID verification against a visitor list. The guard checking his driver's license paused, looked at Marcus's face, back at the photo, then waved him through without comment. Special Agent Keisha Morrison met him in the lobby. She was 45, black, carrying herself with the controlled precision of someone who'd spent 20 years proving competence in rooms that assumed she didn't belong. Her handshake was firm, professional, so her eyes assessing him with the speed of someone trained to read people in seconds. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming." She led him to an elevator, pressed the button for the 14th floor. The ride up was silent except for the mechanical hum and the faint music nobody ever actually listened to. Marcus held the briefcase Rosa had given him, filled with 30 years of evidence that weighed maybe 12 pounds physically, but felt heavier. The conference room was designed for depositions and plea bargains, for the kind of conversations that changed lives. Large table, 8 chairs, recording equipment visible in the ceiling corners. 2 other people were already there. A white man in his 50s wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus made in a month, and a younger woman, Asian, taking notes on a laptop. Morrison gestured to a chair. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen and paralegal specialist Amanda Park. They'll be handling the prosecution if we move forward. Marcus set the briefcase on the table. Chen leaned forward, fingers steepled. Agent Morrison briefed us on your initial contact. Before we proceed, I need to be clear about what cooperation means. You'll be asked to testify under oath, potentially multiple times. Your employment history will be examined. Your credibility will be attacked. Are you prepared for that? Yes, sir. You have a daughter, correct? 7 years old? The question landed like a fist. Marcus kept his face neutral. Yes, sir. Retaliation against witnesses is a federal crime, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. We can offer protection, but we can't guarantee absolute safety. You need to understand the risk you're taking. Marcus thought about the phone calls, about Uncle Marcus's brake lines, about Emma asking if he was going to be okay. I understand. But staying silent is a different kind of risk, one that costs more. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded to Morrison. She pulled out a digital recorder, set it on the table between them. Let's start at the beginning. When did you first become aware of discriminatory practices at Holt Aerotech? Marcus talked for 40 minutes without stopping. Described the application he'd submitted in 2018, bachelor's degree, military service, 3 patents pending. Described the rejection email citing culture fit, despite qualifications exceeding posted requirements. Or described taking the custodian position because Emma needed stability, and he needed to be present, needed to be the father Sarah had made him promise to be. He described 7 years of watching less qualified engineers make decisions about systems he understood better. Described Rosa's notebook with 73 names. Described the pressure variance he'd noticed, the helicopter he'd fixed, the humiliation in front of 47 witnesses. Amanda Park's fingers flew across the keyboard, transcribing everything. Chen took notes by hand, occasionally stopping Marcus to clarify details, to establish timeline precision that would matter in court. You mentioned patents. Do you still hold them? Yes, sir. 3 patents approved between 2019 and 2021. Rotary wing stabilization systems, predictive maintenance algorithms, anti-pressure regulation improvements, and Holt Aerotech's H145 uses pressure regulation systems? Yes, sir. The one I fixed Thursday incorporated technology similar to my patent. They've been using my innovations without compensation or acknowledgement for 3 years. That's intellectual property theft on top of everything else. Marcus opened the briefcase, started laying out documents. Rosa's complaint files, 73 of them, photocopied and organized chronologically. Rebecca's salary analysis showing the $22,000 disparity. Jamal's witness statements from 14 former employees. Carlos's audio recordings of supervisors casually discussing racial exclusion. The 2016 email from Jonathan Holt sat on top, its words damning in their bureaucratic precision. Maintain operational homogeneity privately. Client comfort equals revenue. Chen read it twice, face unreadable in the way prosecutors learn to control reactions. This is explicit instruction to discriminate. Written by the CEO. Morrison picked up another document, federal contract applications claiming 15% minority workforce when reality was 7%, all custodial. $370 million in contracts obtained through false certifications. That's fraud under the False Claims Act. The door opened. Another agent entered, carrying a box that required 2 hands. He set it on the table, Rebecca's briefcase of internal emails, thousands of pages Felix had sent over 15 years of burying complaints. Dr. Chen provided this yesterday. Complete email archive showing systematic suppression of discrimination reports. Amanda Park pulled out her phone. Al showed Chen something on the screen. His eyebrows rose fractionally. We just received confirmation from NTSB archives. The 1997 Marcus Thompson case file was flagged for suspicious circumstances but closed due to lack of witness cooperation. Brake lines showed evidence of cutting tools. Morrison leaned back, arms crossed. Patterns spanning 30 years. Federal contract fraud. Civil rights conspiracy. Possible wrongful death. Mr. Thompson, this is bigger than one company. This is institutional. How many other aerospace companies operate the same way? Based on industry data? Most of them. But Holt is the largest, the most visible. If we make an example here, it changes the entire sector. Marcus thought about Emma's workshop, about kids who'd never get to build robots because schools in their neighborhoods didn't get funded. The thought about Uncle Marcus and 73 others and how many more there were who'd never filed complaints, who just left quietly and tried to forget. What happens now? Chen closed his notebook, looked directly at Marcus. Now we prepare for war. I'm authorizing federal grand jury proceedings. We'll subpoena records, interview witnesses, build a case that puts Felix Okonkwo in prison and forces structural change across the industry. Timeline: indictments within 60 days. Trial within 6 months if they don't settle. And Mr. Thompson, they won't settle. Not at first. They'll fight because settling admits guilt, and guilt means civil liability in the hundreds of millions. So we go to trial. Yes. Which means you need to be prepared for them to attack everything about you. Your military service, your marriage, your parenting. It's your decision to work as a custodian. They'll try to paint you as disgruntled, opportunistic, fabricating evidence. Let them. Truth doesn't need perfect messengers. The words came out steady, certain, carrying weight, Morrison recognized. She'd seen it before in whistleblowers who survived, the kind of moral clarity that couldn't be cross-examined away. Chen stood, extended his hand. We'll be in touch within 48 hours with witness protection protocols. Don't go back to Holt property. Don't contact any current employees. And Mr. Thompson, thank you. What you're doing matters. Marcus shook hands, gathered the evidence back into the briefcase. The meeting had lasted 2 hours. When he walked out of the federal building, the sun was higher, the shadows shorter, the city moving around him with indifference to the fact that his life had just become evidence in a federal prosecution. His phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca. Alexandra knows you met with DOJ Felix, called emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Marcus stared at the message, realized what it meant. They were moving faster than expected, circling wagons, preparing defense, which meant the next 48 hours would determine whether this became a case that mattered or another story about someone who tried and failed. He typed back, "Good. Let them panic." Across town in the Holt Aerotech boardroom, Alexandra stood at the head of the table facing 12 board members who looked at her like she'd personally detonated the company's future. Felix sat to her right, folders stacked in front of him, and wearing the expression of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. Gregory Lansing spoke first, voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the board. The Department of Justice contacted our legal counsel this morning. They're convening a grand jury to investigate civil rights violations and federal contract fraud. Care to explain how this happened under your watch? Alexandra's hands pressed flat against the mahogany, willing herself steady. It happened under my father's watch, too, and his predecessors. This has been systematic for 30 years. That's not an answer. That's deflection. Felix cleared his throat, opened the top folder. If I may, the individual making these allegations is Marcus Thompson, recently terminated custodian. He violated safety protocols, accessed restricted equipment without authorization, and has documented mental health concerns related to his wife's death. The lie was surgical, designed to undermine before evidence could speak. Alexandra felt something crack inside her, the last pretense that she could navigate this without choosing sides. That's not true. Marcus Thompson is a former Army warrant officer with 3 patents in aviation systems. He was qualified for senior engineering positions, and we rejected him because of race. The board went silent. Felix's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the folder edge. Miss Holt, with respect, you're basing this on his personnel file that I actually read, on patent records I verified, on the fact that he diagnosed and fixed a $40 million helicopter your engineering team couldn't solve. Rebecca Chen, the board member, a no relation to the engineer, leaned forward. Are the allegations true? Did we systematically discriminate? Alexandra pulled out her laptop, turned it to face the board. Personnel data filled the screen. 127 engineers, demographic breakdown, promotion records, salary disparities, 0 black engineers in 7 years, $22,000 average salary gap, 73 discrimination complaints, all dismissed. Yes, the allegations are true. Lansing's face reddened. You're admitting to federal crimes in a board meeting? I'm admitting to reality before it becomes a conviction. We have 2 options. Cooperate fully with the investigation and implement immediate reforms, or fight it and watch this company collapse under criminal indictments and civil suits. Felix stood, voice sharp. But Miss Holt is clearly compromised by personal feelings about this situation. I move we vote to accept her resignation effective immediately and appoint interim leadership. Alexandra looked at him, really looked, and saw what Uncle Marcus must have seen in 1997, saw the mechanism of institutional power, the human face of systematic oppression, the banality of evil wearing a Yale MBA and expensive cologne. I'm not resigning. And if this board votes to protect Felix over fixing what's broken, I'll testify for the prosecution myself. The room erupted. 3 board members talking over each other, Lansing demanding order, Felix's face going carefully blank. Alexandra stood perfectly still, heart hammering, aware she just crossed a line that eliminated retreat. Rebecca Chen, the board member, spoke into the chaos. Why second Alexandra's position? We cooperate fully, we implement reforms. We survive this by being better, not by covering up. The vote took 20 minutes of argument. 7-5, cooperation won. Felix's resignation was demanded unanimously, effective immediately. Security would escort him from the building within the hour. Alexandra watched him leave, saw 30 years of systematic racism walk out in a tailored suit, and felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's funeral. Not satisfaction, not relief. The exhausted recognition that doing the right thing didn't undo the wrong, just stopped it from continuing. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You just destroyed your father's legacy. She typed back, He destroyed it himself. I'm just acknowledging it. That afternoon, Marcus picked up Emma from school or drove her to Rosa's basement where she could work on her robot while the adults had difficult conversations. Emma didn't ask why, just brought her backpack and her components and settled at the kitchen table with the kind of focus that reminded Marcus of Sarah in the hospital, trying to read medical journals when the pain let her. Rosa's living room was crowded. Rebecca the engineer, Jamal, Carlos, and 6 more former employees who'd driven in from New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. People whose careers had been destroyed, who'd been forced into NDAs, who'd rebuilt lives from rubble, and were now risking those reconstructions for the chance at accountability. Morrison had sent a secure message that morning. Grand jury convened. Subpoenas issued for Holt Aerotech records. Felix Okonkwo resigned this afternoon. Palmer, you're cleared to speak with other witnesses. The resignation was a tell. Felix wouldn't leave voluntarily, which meant the board had forced him out, which meant they knew the case was strong enough that association became liability. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of 17 pairs of eyes. The DOJ is moving forward. Grand jury, criminal investigation, the full apparatus. They're going after Felix for obstruction and conspiracy. They're going after the company for fraud. Jamal spoke first. What about us? The 73 people who filed complaints. Civil suits come after criminal convictions. If the DOJ wins, you'll have grounds to sue for damages. Back pay, emotional distress, career losses. We're talking millions. One of the Connecticut people, a woman in her 50s, Latina, and tired eyes, raised her hand. I lost my house fighting this. Spent 8 years in legal limbo before settling for $60,000 and an NDA. If I break that NDA now, they'll sue me for breach. Not if the NDA was obtained through fraud or coercion. The DOJ attorney said settlements signed under false pretenses aren't enforceable. Rebecca pulled up her laptop, showed the timeline she'd built. Felix buried 73 complaints over 7 years. But before him, his predecessor buried 92 complaints over 12 years. This goes back to 1994 at minimum, probably further. Carlos leaned forward. How do we prove it's systematic instead of isolated? Pattern and practice. Multiple witnesses, consistent methodology, documentary evidence showing intent. That's why we need everyone willing to testify. Hands started going up around the room. 14 people committing to testimony despite risk, despite the NDAs they'd signed, despite the years they'd spent trying to forget. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore, wasn't about Emma's workshop or his wounded pride. This was about 73 people who deserved acknowledgement, about Uncle Marcus who deserved justice, about every black engineer who'd ever been told they weren't culture fit when the real problem was the culture. When can we testify? Grand jury hearings start in 2 weeks. After that, depositions for trial. The DOJ attorney said to expect this to take 6 months minimum, possibly longer if Holt appeals. 6 months of unemployment, of uncertainty, of living on savings that didn't exist. Marcus thought about the $412 in his account, about rent due in 4 days, about how he'd explain to Emma that Christmas might be smaller this year because her father chose principle over paychecks. Rosa spoke up from the kitchen doorway where she'd been listening. We start a fund, support for witnesses who lose income during the process. I've got $12,000 in savings. I'm putting in 5. I'm in for 3, Rebecca said immediately. Jamal nodded. 2,000. Around the room, pledges came. small amounts that represented sacrifice from people who'd already lost so much. By the time everyone had spoken, they'd raised $23,000, enough to help witnesses survive the gap between testimony and verdict. Marcus's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't considered that the community Felix tried to atomize would reconstitute itself around shared purpose. Thank you, all of you. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. The meeting lasted another hour. Logistics and strategy and the practical details of coordinating 17 witnesses across 4 states. Emma appeared periodically, asking questions about her robot's sensor calibration that Rosa helped answer. Watching them, his daughter, and this woman who documented injustice for 7 years, Marcus felt the future shift from theoretical to possible. By 7 p.m. people were leaving, exchanging contact information, promising to stay connected. Marcus helped Rosa clean up, stacking chairs and washing coffee mugs while Emma packed her components. "You know they're going to come after you hardest," Rosa said quietly. "You're the primary witness, the one who started this. I know. You got protection in place, somewhere safe if it gets bad. Agent Morrison arranged a safe house if needed. But I can't hide from this, Rosa. Emma needs to see me stand. She does, but she needs you alive more." The words hung between them. Unspoken acknowledgement that witness intimidation sometimes escalated beyond phone calls. Marcus thought about Uncle Marcus's break lines, about the 30-year pattern of people who challenged the system and paid for it. "I'm careful, and I'm not alone anymore." Rosa hugged him, quick and tight. The embrace of someone who'd fought this fight longer and understood costs Marcus was still learning. Your uncle would be proud. Sarah, too. That night, Marcus and Emma ate spaghetti at the kitchen table, to her robot prototype sitting between the salt shaker and the unpaid bills. She'd solved the sensor calibration, programmed it to detect obstacles at 3 different ranges, built something that exceeded her grade level by years. "Dad, why did you lose your job?" The question was direct, deserving of honesty. "Because I tried to fix something that was broken. And sometimes fixing things means breaking them first." "Are we going to be okay?" Marcus looked at his daughter, Sarah's eyes, his stubborn chin, brilliance that deserved every opportunity the world could offer. "Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. It might be hard for a while, but we'll make it. Because you're brave, because we're brave. Together." She nodded, satisfied, went back to adjusting servo motors with screwdrivers too big for her hands. Marcus watched her work. He thought about the DOJ case and the grand jury and the 6 months ahead. Thought about how he'd pay rent and buy groceries and keep Emma in the life she deserved. His phone buzzed. Email from Agent Morrison. Final witness count at 23. Grand jury date set for December 2nd. You'll be first testimony. Attached is witness prep schedule. 23 people willing to risk everything for the chance at justice. Marcus opened the attachment, saw his name at the top of the testimony list, saw the weight of being first and setting tone. Emma looked up from her robot. "Can I go to the competition even if we don't have money?" The regional finals. 4 weeks away, December 15th. Entry fee was $80 he didn't have. Required materials another $60. Travel to the venue in Newark maybe $40 for gas and parking. You're going to that competition, Emma. I promise. How do you know? Because some things aren't negotiable. Your future is one of them. The phrase felt different this time, less aspirational and more like commitment. He'd figure out the money somehow. Sell the tools maybe, except the DOJ might need them as evidence. Borrow from Rosa's witness fund, except that money was for survival, not competitions. Find a way that didn't exist yet, but would have to because the alternative was unacceptable. 3 days later, the subpoenas landed at Holt Aerotech like artillery. Federal marshals served them personally. Cameras from local news stations recording executives receiving documents they couldn't refuse. By afternoon, the story was everywhere. DOJ investigates aerospace giant for civil rights violations. Decades of alleged discrimination exposed. A former custodian's testimony sparks federal case. Marcus's phone exploded with requests. News producers, documentary filmmakers, advocacy organizations wanting him to speak, to be interviewed, to become the face of systematic racism in corporate America. He declined everything. This wasn't about publicity, wasn't about personal vindication. This was about 73 complaints and Uncle Marcus's cut brake lines and Emma's generation inheriting something better. But one call he answered. Alexandra Holt, her number showing up at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday when Emma was asleep and Marcus was reviewing testimony notes for the grand jury. Mr. Thompson, I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see you. Her voice carried something he hadn't heard before. Uncertainty, maybe, or the recognition of complicity. Why? Because I testified to the board today. Told them everything you alleged was true. Told them I'd testify for the prosecution if they tried to fight this. And I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't undo 7 years, I know, but it's the only thing I have to offer that's honest. Marcus thought about hanging up, about the satisfaction of making her sit with discomfort the way he'd sat with humiliation. But he thought about Emma, too, about teaching her that grace mattered even when anger was justified. Federal Building, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Agent Morrison will be there. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just show up. The next morning, Alexandra arrived at 9:52, early, wearing less armor than usual, minimal makeup, hair down, the vulnerability of someone who'd stopped performing certainty. Morrison was already there. Was along with Chen and 2 other DOJ attorneys Marcus hadn't met. Alexandra took the seat across from him, hands folded on the table. I reviewed everything, every complaint, every salary record, every promotion decision. You were right about all of it. Marcus waited, letting silence do the work. Words couldn't. My father built this system deliberately. I maintained it through ignorance and convenience. I told myself I was protecting the company when really I was protecting my inheritance. Chen leaned forward. Miss Holt, you understand that cooperation means testifying against your own company, against your father's legacy? I understand, and I'm prepared to do it. Morrison pulled out a prepared statement, slid it across the table. This outlines your testimony. Review it, sign it, and you'll be granted limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Alexandra read slowly, each page another indictment of the institution she'd led. By the time she reached the signature line, her hands were shaking. If I do this, the board will remove me. The company my father built will be dismantled. Marcus spoke for the first time. Your father's company was built on exclusion. What gets dismantled needed to be. She looked at him, really looked, and he saw something crack, the Ice Queen melting into someone capable of shame. I destroyed your career, humiliated you publicly, fired you for saving our biggest contract. I have no right to ask for forgiveness. You don't, but you can do better going forward. That's the only thing that matters now. Alexandra signed the cooperation agreement. It's her signature turning her from defendant to witness, from perpetrator to collaborator in dismantling what her father built. Chen collected the document, added it to the case file that was growing by the day. Grand jury is in 5 days. Mr. Thompson testifies first. You'll follow. Be prepared for their attorneys to attack everything: your judgment, your loyalty, your motivation. Let them. I'm done protecting lies for the sake of comfort. The meeting lasted another hour. Technical details and timeline coordination. When it ended, Alexandra stopped Marcus in the hallway. Your daughter's school, the workshop that needed lights. I had facilities install a full renovation yesterday. New wiring, LED systems, equipment upgrades. $50,000. Marcus felt the gesture land complicated, gratitude and resentment occupying the same space. That doesn't make us even. I know, but it's a start. December 2nd arrived gray and cold, the kind of day where the sky pressed down like judgment. Marcus stood outside the grand jury room in the federal courthouse, wearing his interview suit, testimony notes he'd memorized but carried anyway. Morrison stood beside him, reviewing last-minute details. 23 grand jurors. They'll ask questions. I'll guide you through evidence. Chen will handle legal framework. Just tell the truth clearly and let the facts speak. The doors opened. Marcus walked into a room designed for accountability. No natural light, recessed fluorescent fixtures, a table where 23 citizens would decide whether the evidence justified indictment. He took the oath, hand on a Bible he didn't entirely believe in, but respected for its symbolic weight. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Chen started with foundation: name, address, education, military service. Established credibility before getting to substance. Then the timeline. Application in 2018. Rejection despite qualifications. Custodial position. 7 years of watching systematic exclusion. Marcus described Rosa's notebook, the 73 complaints Felix buried. Described the 2016 email from Jonathan Holt explicitly ordering discrimination. Described his uncle's cut brake lines and the NTSB report that documented evidence but closed the case anyway. He described fixing the H-145, the public humiliation, the termination for saving $40 million. Described the phone calls threatening Emma, the warnings to stop investigating, the retaliation that escalated when he refused to be silent. The grand jurors took notes, some of them visibly affected. One woman in her 60s kept shaking her head. Another man closed his eyes during the description of Uncle Marcus's death. Morrison presented documents. Each one entered into evidence, each one another brick in the prosecution's foundation. The 2016 email, the false diversity certifications, the audio recordings of supervisors casually excluding those people from technical work. Alexandra testified after lunch, her voice steady despite obvious cost. Described discovering the personnel files, the salary disparities, the pattern she'd ignored because acknowledging it meant admitting complicity. Described the board meeting where she chose truth over protection, the cooperation agreement she'd signed knowing it would end her career. By 4 p.m., the grand jury had heard from 7 witnesses. By the end of the week, they'd heard from all 23. On December 9th, they issued indictments. Felix Okonkwo on 17 federal counts including conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and federal contract fraud. Holt Aerotech as a corporate entity on 12 counts of systematic discrimination and fraudulent certification. The news broke at 6 p.m. Marcus watched it from his apartment, Emma doing homework at the kitchen table, oblivious to the fact that her father's testimony had just changed an industry. His phone rang. Morrison. Indictments came through. This is officially a criminal case now. Timeline to trial? 6 months if they fight. But Chen thinks they'll settle. The evidence is overwhelming, and a trial means discovery, which means every internal document becomes public record. Marcus thought about 73 people waiting for vindication, about Uncle Marcus and 30 years of institutional racism, about whether settlement delivered justice or just ended cases. If they settle, what happens to the individual victims? Civil suits proceed separately. The criminal conviction establishes pattern and practice, which makes civil cases much easier to win. And Felix? Federal prison. Minimum 8 years if convicted, probably more with sentencing enhancements. Good. The word came out harder than Marcus intended, carrying weight of 7 years invisible and 4 years grieving and 30 years of family trauma. Justice wasn't supposed to feel like satisfaction, but sometimes it did anyway. 2 weeks later, Emma competed in the regional robotics finals at a facility in Newark that smelled like electronics and teenage ambition. Marcus had scraped together the entry fee by selling his fiber optic inspection camera, the one from Kandahar, worth maybe $800 to the right buyer. He'd gotten $650 from a guy on Craigslist and told himself the sacrifice mattered more than the loss. Emma's robot navigated the obstacle course in 1 minute 47 seconds, faster than any other competitor in her age bracket. The judges called it innovative, elegant, advanced beyond grade level. First place wasn't even close. Marcus watched from the stands, Rosa beside him, Rebecca on his other side. Watched Emma accept the trophy with a gap-toothed smile that looked exactly like Sarah's. And watched her scan the crowd until she found him and held the trophy overhead like proof that brilliance mattered, regardless of melanin. The scholarship to Cornell's summer STEM program came with the first place finish. Full ride, 6 weeks of intensive coursework, access to facilities Emma couldn't imagine. She'd be the youngest participant in the program's history. That night, Marcus let her stay up late, celebrating with ice cream they couldn't afford, and conversation about MIT and robots and futures that suddenly seemed possible instead of theoretical. Dad, you said we'd be okay even when you lost your job. You were right. We're not okay yet, baby. But we're getting there. Because you fought the bad people? Because we fought them. Together. You and me and Rosa and everyone who refused to stay quiet. Emma fell asleep with the trophy on her nightstand, her robot prototype beside it, her future expanding in ways Marcus could protect now instead of just promise. 3 months later, in March, Holt Aerotech settled. The announcement came through Chen via encrypted email. $127 million total. $18 million distributed to the 73 complaint filers, averaging $246,000 each. $84 million in penalties to the federal government. $25 million to establish diversity initiatives and independent monitoring. Felix Okonkwo pleaded guilty to avoid trial, received 8 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility. The company admitted no wrongdoing officially, but the settlement terms required comprehensive reforms, independent HR oversight, mandatory diversity audits, transparent complaint processes, partnership with HBCUs for recruitment. Marcus's share of the settlement was $387,000. Back pay for 7 years, as if he'd been hired at senior engineer salary in 2018, plus damages for wrongful termination and emotional distress. After taxes and legal fees, he'd clear $284,000, more money than he'd ever seen. Enough to move Emma somewhere with better schools, to pay for college, to never worry about rent again. enough to make him wonder if justice measured in dollars could ever compensate for years measured in invisibility. He sat at the kitchen table, settlement check in hand, trying to feel something other than exhausted. The fight was over, but winning felt less like triumph and more like being allowed to stop bleeding. Emma came home from school, saw the check, didn't understand what it meant. Is that a lot of money? It's enough, baby. Enough to make sure you never have to work in the dark again. Are you happy? Marcus thought about Sarah, about Uncle Marcus, about 73 people who'd tried to speak up before him. Thought about the system that had broken all of them and how settlement didn't dismantle structures, just made them more careful. I'm relieved. Happy is different. What's the difference? Happy is when things get better. Relieved is when things stop getting worse. She considered this with 7-year-old seriousness, then hugged him. I think Mom would say you made things better. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. That weekend, Marcus drove to Albany, to the cemetery where Uncle Marcus was buried. The headstone was modest, weathered by 30 years of seasons, grass growing up around the edges. He knelt, placed his hand on the cold granite, and they indicted them. Felix is going to prison. The company paid $17 million to the families you tried to protect. It took 30 years, but they finally listened. The wind carried no response, just the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of traffic. Marcus stayed there for 20 minutes, telling his uncle about Emma's robotics win, about the Cornell scholarship, about the future that was possible now because someone had fought even when fighting seemed futile. He drove home feeling lighter, like setting down weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't permanent. In April, California passed the Thompson Act, mandatory civil rights audits for any company holding federal contracts over $10 million. 12 other states followed within 6 months. The aerospace industry faced a reckoning. 8 companies launched internal investigations, 43 executives resigned or were terminated. Marcus testified to Congress in May, House Committee on Oversight, cameras recording his statement for the permanent record. Dignity isn't negotiable. Excellence isn't exclusive. America works when we all get a fair shot, not just when the system decides we're acceptable. The clip went viral, 5 million views in 48 hours, became a reference point for discussions about systematic racism in STEM fields. Marcus declined every interview request, every speaking engagement, every opportunity to become a public figure. He'd told his truth. The rest was for others to process. In June, Alexandra Holt resigned from the board she'd served for 6 years. The company her father built would continue without her, or under new leadership committed to reforms she'd voted to implement. She sold her penthouse, moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, took a position teaching aerospace engineering at Howard University. She called Marcus once after the announcement. I know I can't undo the harm, but I'm trying to do better going forward. That's all anyone can do. Make different choices than the ones that got us here. Will you ever forgive me? Marcus thought about that question, about Sarah and Emma and the 7 years he'd spent invisible. I don't know, but I don't need to forgive you for you to be better. Do it anyway. She thanked him and hung up. Marcus deleted her number, not out of anger, but out of the recognition that some chapters close and reopening them serves no purpose. Summer arrived. Emma turned 8 in July, celebrated with a party Rosa hosted in her backyard. 20 kids, most of them from her robotics club, building competing robots and eating cake and being brilliant in the unconscious way children are before the world teaches them limits. Marcus watched from the porch, thinking about how different this birthday was from last year, from the years when celebration meant dollar store decorations and homemade cake because bakeries were expensive. Rebecca found him there, handed him a beer he didn't want, but accepted anyway. You did it. Changed an industry, got justice for 73 people, secured your daughter's future. Doesn't feel like I did it. Feels like we survived it. Same thing, in the end. Maybe. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emma explain gear ratios to a kid twice her size who listened with rapt attention. Or this was the future Uncle Marcus had fought for. The future Sarah had wanted. The future Marcus had protected by refusing to accept that survival required silence. In August, Marcus accepted a position at the DOJ's Civil Rights Division as a consultant on employment discrimination cases in technical industries. The salary was government scale, comfortable but not extravagant. The work mattered, helping other whistleblowers navigate the system he'd learned by necessity. Emma started third grade in September at a school with a fully funded STEM program. The workshop lights worked perfectly, the equipment was current, the teachers expected excellence from every student regardless of background. She thrived in ways that made Marcus's chest tight with gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the present, or grief for all the kids who didn't get these opportunities because their parents couldn't fight the system and win. One October evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, helping Emma with homework, advanced physics for 8-year-olds, studying Newton's laws through the mechanics of her robot. The apartment was quiet, autumn light slanting through windows that faced east. His phone buzzed. Email from Morrison. Update on Holt case. Industry-wide reforms implemented in 47 companies. Thompson Act expanded to require diversity reporting for all federal contractors. Your testimony cited in 12 subsequent cases. Emma looked up from her calculations. Dad, what's legacy? It's what you leave behind when you're gone. The part of you that keeps affecting the world. Like Mom? Exactly like Mom. She took care of people when they were sick, and that kindness didn't die with her. Emma thought about this, pencil tapping against her notebook. Are you leaving a legacy? Marcus looked at his daughter, 8 years old, accepted to MIT's summer program, building robots that thought for themselves, living in a world slightly less broken than the one he'd inherited. I'm trying, baby. Every day I'm trying. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Marcus opened his laptop to the file he'd created the night before, meeting the DOJ, the letter to Emma, the one set to send if he didn't log in for 72 hours, the goodbye he'd written in case witness intimidation escalated beyond threats. He read it once, slowly, remembering the fear and determination that had coexisted when he wrote it. Then he deleted it, every word, let it disappear into digital void. He didn't need goodbye letters anymore, didn't need contingency plans for worst-case scenarios. The fight was over, and they'd survived, and the world was marginally better because he'd refused to accept that justice was optional. Marcus closed the laptop, walked to Emma's room, stood in the doorway watching her sleep. The trophy from regionals sat on her desk beside acceptance letters to 3 different summer programs. The robot prototype she'd built in darkness now had descendants, version 2.0, 3.0, each iteration more sophisticated. Sarah's photo hung on the wall above Emma's bed, the same frame from the kitchen counter 4 years ago. Marcus looked at his wife's face, thought about the promise he'd made in the hospital. I put her first, Sarah, even when it cost everything. Even when I wasn't sure we'd make it. I put her first by refusing to teach her that survival means acceptance. The apartment was silent except for Emma's breathing and the ambient sounds of Queens at night. Marcus stood there until his legs ached, watching his daughter dream, protecting her future the only way that mattered, by making sure the world she woke to was more just than the one that had tried to break him. In the darkness, standing guard over brilliance that deserved every opportunity, Marcus Thompson finally felt something other than relief. He felt peace. Not the peace of battles avoided, but the peace of battles fought and survived, and turned into something that would outlast him. Emma would grow up knowing her father had refused to be invisible, would grow up in an industry forced to reckon with systematic exclusion. I would grow up building robots and studying physics and becoming whatever she chose without the weight of institutional racism making every achievement twice as hard. That was legacy. That was justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Marcus returned to the kitchen, made tea he wouldn't drink, sat at the table where bills used to pile up and settlement checks now lived in a folder labeled Future. Outside, Queens moved through its nighttime rhythms, sirens, voices, the subway rumbling beneath streets that held stories of survival nobody would document. His phone sat dark and quiet. No more threats, no more unknown numbers, no more warnings to think about Emma. The machine that had crushed 73 people before him was dismantled, its operators imprisoned or resigned, or its methods exposed to sunlight that made continuation impossible. Tomorrow he'd take Emma to her robotics club. Next week she'd start advanced placement math. Next month, the Cornell acceptance letter would arrive for summer programming. Next year, she'd keep building and learning and becoming. And Marcus would keep working, helping other whistleblowers, consulting on discrimination cases, turning his survival into expertise that protected others from having to fight alone. The story didn't end with victory. It ended with continuation, with the hard work of making sure structural change survived individual settlement, with the daily choice to be better than the systems that had tried to define him. Marcus looked at Sarah's photo one more time, carried in his wallet now instead of on counters. We made it, love. Emma's safe. The future's possible. I kept my promise. In the photo, Sarah smiled, frozen in a moment before cancer and loss, carrying the optimism that Marcus had borrowed when his own ran out. He'd paid back that debt by fighting when fighting seemed impossible, by refusing to accept that his daughter's brilliance mattered less because of melanin, by transforming personal harm into institutional change. That was enough. Had to be enough. Would be enough. Marcus finished the tea that had gone cold, turned off the lights, went to bed in an apartment that felt like home instead of survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Emma's education, the ongoing DOJ work, the reality that systems changed slowly even after indictments. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Thompson slept without wondering if he'd made the wrong choice. He'd made the only choice that mattered, and it had been enough.